Good evening. I'm Nacho Lozano, the anchor, and your host for tonight's awards. Welcome to the 2021 NAHJ Hall of Fame Awards. The National Association of Hispanic Journalists believes in recognizing the legacies of those who have been overlooked by mainstream history. Tonight, Jovita Idár and Jesús Colón will be posthumously inducted into the Association Hall of Fame for dedicating their lives and careers to advocating for the fair and accurate representation of Latinos in news. No podemos permitir que nuestros logros y nuestras vidas se borren de la historia. Por esta razón nos reunimos esta noche para celebrar públicamente y reconocer los momentos decisivos que se han dejado fuera del radar durante demasiados años, porque nuestra historia es la historia de los Estados Unidos. El ingreso de Jovita Idár y Jesús Colón, campeones de la narración latina, es importante porque estos dos periodistas representan la necesidad que nuestra democracia tiene hoy de transparencia e inclusión en las redacciones de todo el país. The existence of our democracy lies in the balance of a free press. Sin libertad de prensa, sin democracia, en nuestros países, se arriesga una vida mejor para nuestras familias. But daily, we see an increasing threat to our right to work as journalists, in particular, harassment and violence that disproportionately affect journalists of color. Over the past year, following the protests against the murder of George Floyd, we identified a growing nationwide trend that is unacceptable. Whether in Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Chicago, or near our homes in El Salvador, Venezuela, Cuba, Colombia, and all regions where we face brutality for our right to work, we must stand together to defend reporters on the streets who cover the news as people's eyes and ears. Es por eso que esta noche honramos a dos periodistas pioneros que allanaron el camino para los latinos en la industria del periodismo. Ambos integrantes son modelos a seguir que encarnan la fuerza y la resiliencia y la compasión. Sus narraciones brindaron al país una imagen más matizada y compleja de la cultura y las experiencias hispanas y latinas en los Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, sus contribuciones a menudo se quedaron fuera de la narrativa nacional. Lucharon con valentía para sacar a la luz cuestiones importantes de discriminación, pero también de racismo e inequidad política en sus comunidades y más allá. Sus palabras y trabajos sirvieron de catalizadores para cambios importantes en nuestro país y abrieron las puertas para futuros narradores latinos. Tonight, we discover more about how these two journalists, even before our time, helped to forge a path forward for our communities in the U.S. through revolutionary persistence in their fight for the truth and justice. And as we accelerate the power of Latinos in journalism, I'd like to remind people to join the conversation by using the hashtag NAHJ2021. Queremos conocer tus momentos favoritos esta noche y cómo el periodismo impacta tu vida diaria a través del hashtag NAHJ2021. Our first guest has carried storytelling at his heart and truly understands the power our voices, perspectives, and experiences can lead to this world. Joining us to kick off this evening's celebration, please welcome author, journalist, and poet, Ed Morales.
Thank you, Nacho, and good evening to all the viewers. I'm Ed Morales, and I'm a professor at Columbia University and also a journalist and author of 4 books. These are particularly difficult times for Latinos. A report released just this week by the Pew Hispanic Center says that the COVID pandemic has been devastating to our community. About half say a family member or close friend has been hospitalized or died from coronavirus, says the report. And a similar share say they or someone in their household has lost a job or taken a pay cut during the pandemic. The pandemic arrived in the midst of a period when Latinos were under constant attack by a president who disparaged them, causing hate-fueled racist incidents to increase. The effect of the coronavirus pandemic was disproportionately negative for Latinos, and in the context of our continuing struggle with wealth inequality, inadequate educational and health outcomes, housing segregation, and victimization through police violence, it is remarkable that we still show a capacity for hope and resilience. I know the Latino story all too well. I grew up in the Bronx in a working-class family and was among the first in my extended family to be accepted to a private university in the US with a scholarship. After graduating, I tried to find a way to balance my dream of writing with my thirst for knowledge about politics, society, and world events. I did some work in community building and organizing. I did graduate studies in Latin American economics. I wrote short stories and performed as a bilingual poet at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. The cafe is where I found my identity as a Spanglish speaker, a spinner of rhymes, and a political voice from the streets. But at the same time, I found myself more and more establishing a career in journalism, which seemed like a place where I could reach a larger audience and be taken more seriously and tell real stories about real people. As my skills sharpened while working among many writers I admired, I once again faced a decision. Should I commit myself to a specific beat like most journalists did? Local, national news, arts and entertainment, sports? I'd done all these kinds of stories, but I realized how much I enjoyed writing about my own people, Latinos. I decided, in a departure from the norm, to craft a beat about Latinos and what we participate in and what affects us and what we have in common, what we have different about us, whether it's immigration, urban affairs, film, theater, literature, business. I would write about Latinos in New York, Miami, and LA. Latin Americans from Mexico, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Colombia, even Brazil. In some ways, it made my career less stable and predictable, but it allowed me to unlock so many secrets about who I was and make connections to a much broader way of seeing myself as a Latino. In the course of my career as a Latino-focused journalist, I met people like U.S. Representative Luis Gutierrez, the late Mexican author Carlos Fuentes, Colombian singer Shakira, Nuyorican goddess Jennifer Lopez, Chicano playwright Luis Valdez, Mexican-American writer Sandra Cisneros. I investigated street gangs in the Bronx and politicians in Puerto Rico. I wrote about San Antonio, Texas, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. I was the first writer to review an album of Mexican rock for Rolling Stone. When my parents decided to move back to Puerto Rico for retirement, it gave me a chance to reconstruct who I was by being forced to speak Spanish and understand what was really going on in Puerto Rico. These experiences made me less hesitant to travel to Latin America and more able to take advantage of new windows into the daily lives of Latin Americans that my suddenly increased abilities in Spanish gave me. They gave me a sense of return and embrace of who I was. They gave me the chance to relearn a language and many different cultures and break out of a US-centric bubble. I learned about the effects of climate change on migration earlier than many of us because I was able to talk to a taxi driver in Bogota in the early 2010s who had just arrived from the countryside and told me about the terrible droughts that forced him off the land and have to work in the city. I interviewed a Mexico City theater performer who started a rock band because he was inspired by an obscure art movement in France called Situationists. I was able to understand how much pleasure a man in La Guaira, Venezuela, got from an American television shows because he was the first one in his neighborhood to get DirecTV. I learned from a woman in Michoacan why Day of the Dead was so important to indigenous people in Mexico. Through journalism, I was able to discover many different parts of myself and learn about the broad constituency of Latinos in the US and around Latin America. I wanted to look beyond my everyday experience, and I found new worlds and new stories to tell. In the end, I felt that somehow when my interview subjects spoke to me, they saw a little bit of themselves in me. And I felt they were telling me parts of their story they might not have told to someone who didn't speak their language, whether it was Spanish, Spanglish, or urban Latino English. That's why it's so important for Latinos to do journalism, to bring their own point of view to a field of voices that are often not in touch with us, and to help tell the stories of those who might connect with us a little easier. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ed Morales, for those words of inspiration. You underscore what the National Association of Hispanic Journalists is all about, ensuring our future, making sure we thrive in a craft that is vital to a robust and diverse American democracy. Ed's stirring words take us to this exciting part of our program, where we introduce to you the latest inductees into the NAHJ Hall of Fame. ¿Saben? Es importante que reconozcamos los legados, el trabajo de los periodistas ignorados por la historia principal. Este año honramos la vida y el trabajo de dos periodistas pioneros que allanaron el camino para los periodistas latinos. They dedicated their lives and careers teaching, training, and mentoring Latino journalists and fighting for fair and accurate representation of Latinos in news. Jovita and Jesús were our storytellers. They are role models for us, showing us how we win being both compassionate and resilient. They showed the news business a more complex picture of the Hispanic and Latinos in the United States. Yet, their contributions have gone unheralded. We are fixing that tonight. Nuestro primer miembro del Salón de la Fama de la Noche contó historias sobre sus luchas personales como puertorriqueño negro. Conmovió e inspiró a muchos escritores, pero sus contribuciones raras veces fueron reconocidas en la literatura histórica. Jesús was a trailblazer and a mentor to those who followed in his footsteps. NAHJ is proud to honor and immortalize him in the Hall of the Fame. Here's more on Jesús Colón.
Jesús Colón, escritor,
storyteller, poet, community activist,
humanitario y originario de Puerto Rico.
credited as the father of the Nuyorican movement, the son of Paula López Colón
y Mauricio Colón Coto, uno de 5 hijos. Su amor por el periodismo comenzó en su patria. Un adolescente autodidacta, Colón comenzó a escribir para el periódico Adelante en 1917, antes de llegar a Brooklyn, Nueva York, a la edad de 16 años.
Colón worked as a dishwasher, postal clerk, and at the docks in Brooklyn. He was often faced with discrimination due to his struggles speaking English and his skin color. Colón found a way to fight discrimination through his writings.
Colón encontró una manera de luchar contra la discriminación a través de sus escritos. Colón escribió sobre sus experiencias y las experiencias de otros, lo que marcaría el tono para el movimiento literario conocido como el movimiento Nuyorican.
His career would span 4 decades, working in multiple outlets, creating inspiring literacy.
El Nuevo Mundo, Vida Obrera, La Voz, Pueblos Hispanos y Liberación.
It was at this time Colón's involvement in socialist labor movements and political affiliations put him under investigation by the House Un-American Activities Committee during the McCarthy era.
Las investigaciones no lo disuadieron de su pasión por la alfabetización. En 1955, Colón comenzó un periódico en español donde a menudo publicaba columnas impulsando el cambio social y defendiendo los derechos de los puertorriqueños. En busca de un cambio, Colón se postuló para la oficina del Contralor en la ciudad de Nueva York en 1969.
Colón would go on to become a published author, writing the masterpiece A Puerto Rican in New York and other sketches in 1961. Jesús Colón was born to help others form organizations assisting Latinos struggling to survive financially, especially those desiring a life free from racism.
Jesús Colón murió a la edad de 73 años en la ciudad de Nueva York. Fue cremado y sus cenizas esparcidas en el Río de la Plata, en Calley, Puerto Rico, donde nació.
Tonight, Blanca Vázquez, co-director of Hunter College's James Aronson Awards for Social Justice Journalism, join us to induct Jovita Idár into the Hall of Fame. Blanca, welcome.
Good evening. I thank the National Association of Hispanic Journalists for this honor. of accepting the award on behalf of the Jesús Colón family and the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. Jesús Colón and I go back a long way. In 1961, he wrote A Puerto Rican in New York and Other Sketches. A couple of years later, I'm walking down the hall of the public library in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and I see the book on the shelf, and I'm stunned. I stop just to see Puerto Rican, that word Puerto Rican, in a public space. This is the first, right? It's the first accounting, it's the first stories of the Puerto Rican migration, of working class lives, of dignity, of the struggle against racism and discrimination. Fast forward 20 years later, I come out of the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism and I go to work at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies because they're undertaking an oral history project of the Puerto Rican migration. Has public programs and media components. The very first event in the Voices of the Migration Project is focused on Jesús Colón and that pionero Brooklyn community. And to show the sort of range, of Jesús Colón's life, reading his works at this public program were the African-American actor Ossie Davis, right? And our own Miriam Colón, founder, right, of the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. Until his death in 1974, Jesús Colón remains a trade union organizer, an independent journalist, a columnist. He runs for public office. He just never stops, right? So this is an important part of our history to acknowledge not only the pioneros, but also the fact that it's really the progressives, right, that actually forge the way, right, raise the issues first, right? So we hope to find a family member, right, to turn this over to. But if not, it'll be deposited at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. The Centro, right, it has the Jesús Colón papers. So available online, and when the university opens up again, in person, right, are much more material and information about Jesús Colón and our other pionero communities, right? So I welcome you to come visit the Centro, right? And to keep our focus on those who came before and the ancestors that show us the way. Thank you again. Good night.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas noches. On behalf of Noticias Telemundo, welcome to Telemundo Center. It is a real pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight. We are very excited to be the host site for this year's NAHJ Hall of Fame Awards event. Tonight, we are honoring and celebrating two pioneering Latino journalists whose commitment to our profession has helped pave the way for other Latino journalists like myself. They have practiced journalistic values while inspiring others to do the same. Values we hold dear here at Noticias Telemundo, where we believe in saying las cosas como son. From everyone at Noticias Telemundo, we want to thank NAHJ for its commitment to nurturing Latino journalists and growing news coverage of the Latino community. We also want to congratulate the families of tonight's honorees. Muchísimas gracias a todos los colegas que nos están acompañando esta noche y una vez más, bienvenidos.
And now here to debut her new song, Te Amo, Emmy-nominated actress and a star of the Netflix series Julie and the Phantoms, Madison Reyes.
These nights are so lonely when you don't hold me in the moonlight. You wanna hold me, you want me by your side, but you don't treat me like you do. I wanna be needed, for your love I'm greedy. I can't help these feelings, oh no. I know that you love me, but why don't you show me? Are you afraid to love me? Te amo, I know that's the way that I roll. Te entiendo, baby, understand. It's you and it's me for all eternity. Te amo, lonely. In the fight to forget your past, I understand you hurt real bad. But if you break down those walls, you realize I'm not like them at all. Yo te conozco, tú me conoces. I wanna be needed. For your love, I'm greedy. I can't help these feelings. Oh no, I know that you love me, but why don't you show me? Are you afraid to love me? Te amo, I know that's the way that I roll. Te entiendo, baby, understand. It's you and it's me for all eternity. Te amo, I know that's the way that I roll. Te entiendo, baby, understand. I got you, you got me, there's nothing to stop me. Te amo con todo mi corazón. Eres el amor de mi vida. Eres mi todo. Eres mi todo. Te amo, I know that's the way that I roll. Te entiendo, baby, understand. I got you, you got me, there's nothing to stop me. Oh, oh, I know that you love me, so why don't you show me? I know that you love me, so why don't you show me? Show me, oh.
Thanks, Madison. Gabriela Gonzalez is Associate Professor of History at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where she teaches courses on the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, Latinos history, and women's history. She's a Stanford PhD and a Ford Foundation Diversity Fellow, but those are just the headlines. Dr. Gonzalez is an award-winning author of historical texts examining border life and activists. She works with teachers of all levels to redefine and rewrite the histories they teach our children. She's active in efforts to preserve our historical record and with community groups like the Citizens at Last Advisory Board and the Handbook of Texas Women Advisory Board. Please welcome Dr. Gabriela Gonzalez.
Hello, my name is Dr. Gabriela Gonzalez, and I'm a history professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I am the author of Redeeming La Raza, Transborder Modernity, Race, Respectability, and Rights, published by Oxford University Press in 2018, and I'm currently working on the biography of human rights activist Jovita Idár. Jovita Idár was born in Laredo, Texas in 1885 to Nicasio and Jovita Vivero Idár. She became a journalist committed to addressing the economic exploitation and racial caste system known as Juan Crow that Mexican immigrants and Tejanos faced in the early 20th century. Jovita used La Crónica, a Spanish-language newspaper, to address issues of racism, school segregation, poverty, labor organizing, lynchings, and attacks on the Spanish language and Mexican culture. The newspaper also provided coverage of the Mexican Revolution. In September of 1911, La Crónica supported the first Mexican Congress, designed to address the educational, social, and economic conditions of ethnic Mexican people. Thus, they initiated the earliest statewide civil rights campaign in Texas. Women formed an offshoot organization called the League of Mexican Women. The League, led by Jovita Idár, sought to improve the education of Spanish-speaking children. Idár favored women's suffrage and supported active roles for women in public life. In 1913, the Battle of Nuevo Laredo, across the river from Laredo, motivated Idár to assist her friend Leonor Villegas de Magnon in the creation of the White Cross, a medical brigade that nursed combatants during Mexico's Civil War. In 1914, Jovita Idár joined the newspaper staff of El Progreso. The newspaper published an editorial critical of President Woodrow Wilson's decision to send U.S. troops to the Mexican port city of Veracruz. The Texas Rangers attempted to shut down the offices of the newspaper, but were met at the door by a determined Jovita Idár, arguing that the Texas Rangers' plan was unconstitutional since it violated the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of the press. She stood her ground until the Rangers left. The next day, the Texas Rangers returned when Jovita was not present, and unfortunately, they destroyed the presses. Jovita Idár married Bartolo Juarez on May 20th, 1917, and the couple moved to San Antonio. She remained active in the community and helped to raise her nieces, Jovita and Evangeline Fuentes. She died in San Antonio on June 13th, 1946. The work of Jovita Idár is significant because she used journalism to raise awareness and consciousness about social justice issues. She supported civil rights, labor rights, women's rights, and the educational rights of school children. She dreamed of greater justice and democracy in both the United States and Mexico.
Born in 1885, Jovita Idár was one of 8 children. Early on, she developed a passion to help others. That led her to earn her teaching certificate in 1903. In a time when Mexican Americans faced discrimination, segregation, even lynching, Jovita thought it best to leave her teaching career and join her father's newspaper, La Crónica. It was a source of news and activism for Mexican American rights. Strong supporters of the revolution in Mexico, Jovita and her family created the first Mexican Congress aimed at unifying Mexicans across the border to fight. At La Crónica, Jovita would publish articles supporting the women's suffrage movement. By 1911, she had founded and become president of the feminist organization La Liga Femenil Mexicanista. This was aimed at providing a decent education for Mexican American students. During the Mexican Revolution, Idár went to Mexico to work as a nurse and care for the injured. She returned to Texas, to El Paso, to write for El Progreso. There, she protested President Woodrow Wilson's decision to send the military to the border. This brought her scrutiny, and the U.S. Army and Texas Rangers went to the headquarters of El Progreso looking to shut it down. But when they arrived, they found Jovita standing at the doorstep, refusing to let them in. They came back, and eventually they did shut down the newspaper. But Idár continued to advocate and fight for the fair treatment of her people. When Jovita's father passed away in 1914, Idár returned to La Crónica and continued his legacy. Idár would eventually marry and move to San Antonio. There, she became active in the Democratic Party and fought for equal rights of women. Through all of this, her passion for journalism and helping her people never left her. In San Antonio, she became an editor for El Heraldo Cristiano. She volunteered in hospitals. She translated for Spanish-speaking patients. And she started a free kindergarten for children from less fortunate families. Jovita Idár was born to voice the problems of her people and those who never saw themselves represented correctly in the media. Her activism in the early 20th century cast light on those who failed to protect the rights of Latinos.
And now, a very special guest, relative of Jovita Idár, Liz Lopez, joined us to celebrate her induction this evening.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Lopez, and on behalf of the Idár family, and especially the families of Jovita Lopez and Evangelina Rivera, We are deeply honored that the National Association of Hispanic Journalists has chosen our great aunt, Tia Jovita, to be inducted into this outstanding organization. The Idár family was quite large, and our families are only a part of the larger family. But what is significant to us is that our mothers, Jovita and Evangelina, were the only two children of Elvira, Jovita's sister, who died in childbirth. It is our Tia Jovita who played a pivotal role in helping raise our mothers, and therefore an important figure in our upbringing. Our Tia Jovita was a woman of strength, of professionalism, integrity, who stood for the rights of those she worked with, for women's rights, and was an outstanding journalist, not only for her father's newspaper, but also for the Rio Grande Conference of the Methodist Church. She was an amazing political activist in a time when lynchings of Hispanics in Texas was occurring, and was a champion for civil rights. She loved to debate, according to our mothers, and would take on her brothers at Sunday evening dinners when they would get together to talk politics. As it has been said over and over again, she never lost faith in the power of education to lift people out of poverty and injustice. She was a teacher at heart. The stories are many, but again, we want to thank the National Association for Hispanic Journalists for this outstanding honor. Thank you.
Buenas noches. Good evening. Es un honor estar aquí con ustedes. It's an honor to join our great community virtually. Les mando a cada uno un fuerte apapacho. Yo sé que lo necesitamos. We need this big collective embrace. As a new interim managing editor of Palabra, a publication created by NAHJ, that means all of you, I am excited to be sharing some of the vital work that Palabra has done under Ricardo Sandoval Palo's direction, a veteran journalist and instigator. Ricardo founded Palabra with Alberto Mendoza about 2 years ago. The goal was, and still is, to support local independent journalists, to give our NAHJ members a platform that not only amplifies their work, but tells the stories of our communities as they only know best. En español, in Spanglish, en inglés, with ganas, con corazón y conciencia. When the pandemic happened, Palabra's courageous journalists took on the hardest story of our time. I know we all did, and it was really hard. The pandemic not only has taken a deadly toll on our communities, but has underscored the inequities that Latinx people and communities of color have been facing already. It let hate run loose and racism and an immeasurable amount of grief. Palabra responded by creating the Diary of the Pandemic, focusing on those at the front lines, the professionals that felt the impact and exposure of COVID-19 by staying on the job. We reach our first responders, our agricultural workers, those held in immigration detention centers, our vaccine hunters, and members of marginalized communities. The goal, an ongoing chronicle of first-hand experiences from real people living through difficult days. What Palabra evidence is the inventiveness, the solidarity, and the beautiful resilience of our community, siempre para adelante. I present you the Diary of the Pandemic.
Durante los días más fuertes de la contingencia tenía que trabajar. Estaba muy baja la venta y pues no hemos trabajado completo todos los días.
Empezamos a las 3 de la mañana. A las 3 de la mañana y regresamos a su casa a las 8 de la noche.
Y pues no podíamos estar en cuarentena porque tenemos mucho trabajo y teníamos que sacarlo, el temor de perder el trabajo y pues teníamos cosas que pagar.
perdí mi trabajo. Entonces, no ha sido un tiempo muy difícil.
Muy desesperante esto, que a los restaurantes chicos no les puedan dar algo de ayuda. Mi nombre es Teresa Guzmán.
José Díaz Cibrián. Me cayó algo como, digamos, una gripe. Yo pensaba que era una simple gripe. Y me empezó, y ya que cada día ya me empezó a dar fiebre, y que ya se sentía ya que me dio una tos.
Para los negocios chicos, porque yo sabía de los negocios grandes que les estaban dando millones y millones, pero como el mío es tan chico, no sabía si me tocaba a mí también.
All right. Now I want to recognize a journalist whose work is adding a new dimension to the media industry. Joe Rodriguez is the NAHJ Sport Task Force co-chair alongside Ileana Limón Romero, deputy sports editor of the Los Angeles Times. For over a month, the Sports Task Force has curated a space for networking and community building for Latinos sport journalists. It is vital that we focus on journalists of color in sports. Limón Romero and Rodriguez bring new perspectives to a sports community where Latinos are important athletes, but underrepresented behind the microphones at the laptops that produce the coverage that millions of Americans follow so closely. And the Emmy Award-winning Joe Rodriguez has more than 15 years of experience producing live studio, remote, and field sports productions. Joe is an amazing multitasking producer of sports broadcasts, working with everyone from ESPN to Telemundo and EA Sports. He's covered a wide range of events. We're talking about a FIFA World Cup, Olympics, Major League Soccer. The list is endless. Most importantly, both of these Latino journalists add to NAHJ's strong lineup of bilingual and bicultural nieces. They bring a deep understanding of the Latino market for the sport in the United States. Please welcome Joe Rodriguez, owner of El Tri Online.
Muchas gracias, Nacho. De parte de Ileana and myself, we want to thank you very much for hosting us here today. Before El Tri Online, I was a producer at ESPN. So growing up in Southern California, I was a fan and watched ESPN religiously. It was there that I saw Pedro Gomez for the first time. I honestly thought he was Mexican, but regardless, what stood out is that he looked like me, a Latino. It was an inspiring feeling to see Pedro on the air reporting the sports news in English. He was a true pioneer for our people. Fast forward many years later, I got the opportunity to meet Pedro in person in Bristol during one of his visits to the main campus, and I was blown away by the gentleman that he was. Subsequently, I worked with him on countless shows, and his professionalism, work ethic, and kindness were unmatched. Pedro went out of his way to give us his very best. Even after spending 12 plus hours on a shift, he never complained and was always willing to help. Pedro was an incredible human being. Some of the wisest words that showed the type of person he was, he told me during a casual conversation. He said, "Joe, always remember that one day we were the ones trying to break through. And let's not turn our backs on those who ask for help, especially our Latino brothers and sisters." I feel that Latinos will make great strides in every underrepresented sector if we choose to live by those words. Pedro, you are truly missed and will forever live in our hearts.
Me parece a mí que la misión mía como periodista, especialmente como periodista latino, es llamar las cosas por su nombre.
¿Qué tal, raza? Buenas tardes, saludos, feliz inicio de semana.
So you've seen different types of egg decorations. This simple one is pretty nice, but my all-time favorite is the original 8-egg.
Y es en esta cocina económica donde empezaron y terminaron nuestros días aquí en Almoloya.
Bristol, it's Oakland. Can you hear me? Bristol, it's Oakland. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Justin, you step into the plate. You know what's at stake there. What are you thinking?
Me personally, obviously being Cuban American, somebody who was born only 3 weeks after my folks arrived from Cuba, you know, basically I always tell people I was made in Cuba. Yeah, all of a sudden I'm a big U of A guy on every time you see me on TV, and the reason is my son Rio Gomez is a left-handed pitcher for U of A.
Thank you, Joe, for bringing us that tribute. So far tonight, we've been seeing an amazing showcase of Latino journalism, talent, of Latino history. And it's about to get even better. Let's please welcome one of the news industry's best, Nora Lopez. Nora Lopez has been a North Star, guiding many journalists throughout her career. She's an standout in NAHJ's proud Texas contingent. She was a reporter, an editor at the Dallas Morning News, and then an editor with the San Antonio Express News. And now she's that newspaper's executive editor. And of course, she's president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Please welcome Nora Lopez, who will introduce this year's winner of the NAHJ President's Award.
Thank you, Nacho, for that kind welcome. It's been wonderful to engage with so many bright and fascinating Latino professional journalists this week. I'm blessed to count myself among the inspiring community. I've also had occasion to meet with young journalists, including those working for the Latino Reporter. And let me tell you, that has been invigorating. To see this next generation of truth tellers practicing our craft is reassuring. I took on my current position at NAHJ because I fervently believe in its fundamental mission to support and help increase Hispanic involvement and leadership in newsrooms across the country at all levels. I understand the importance of this goal, and it is clear from your attendance tonight that you do too. Now more than ever, amid continuing attacks on the press, it is imperative that we continue to drive critical discussions and advocate for fair and just representation. That was the purpose of NAHJ 2021, and I sincerely thank you all for participating in this conference this week. Navigating our current climate poses unique challenges for journalists today, who face personal attacks as well as general assaults on freedom of the press. We saw how in the last several years, rhetoric was weaponized and turned into violence against all of us. Ours is one of the few professions protected in the Constitution, but the undermining and erosion of our nation's democratic values and institutions, including the Fourth Estate, should worry us all. Without free and independent journalism, practiced without fear or favor, how can any government or state guarantee freedom, justice, and equality? What we do matters. It can be a dangerous yet life-giving vocation, as we saw this week with the death of Reuters photographer Danish Siddiqui. Journalists of color in particular are targeted for being who they are and what they have to say. But we're fighters and survivors, and we're clever and innovative. We are empathetic and uncompromising in the truth, and our pursuit of journalistic excellence will not be deterred. And our various stories, your story, empower the collective story of who we are as a nation. You belong. We must strive every day to grow both within our industry and outside in our communities, building, educating, and strengthening them as we develop ourselves. As our Hall of Fame inductee, Jovita Idár, would say, educate a woman and you educate a family. External forces are not the only threat to our collective will to help each other succeed. To move forward together, we need to rebuke and recognize the damage anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity has wreaked upon our community. The roots of colorism predate any one of us and is embedded in our heritages and history, but that's a tradition we can break. Discrimination and erasure is not an NAHJ value, nor has it ever been, and we won't tolerate its existence in any corner of our organization or industry. Now, perhaps more than ever, we need to reinforce the bonds that link us together to build the solidarity we will need if the world grows more hostile to the truth. We must value the telling of our Latinx stories and believe in the paramount significance of sharing those diverse experiences in all their complexities, beauty and wonder, leaving any part out, even the hard parts, leaving any voice unheard, even the ones we'd rather not hear, gives us an incomplete narrative of our rich ethnic community. That's not the truth. That would be a shade of it. A passion for storytelling exists within all of us, en nuestro corazón latino. We are the oral historians of the hemisferio. We are the raconteurs of cultura. We are the narrators of herencia. Let us carry on that tradition. Thank you for your dedication to this vital role. I am humbled to be among you, and I am so hopeful for the future. This week, we reached a milestone. We've increased our members to over 4,300, and increasing the number and influence of Latinx in the news will help increase the number of Latinx in positions of power, which in turn will help us achieve the parity we seek. That there remains a lot of work ahead of us, and that's why NAHJ exists, because together we're stronger, together our voices are louder. Like any group of diverse, talented people, we need strong leaders with compassion and the drive to guide us. And one such leader being honored tonight has set a high bar of excellence for the work that we do. His commitment to all the values NAHJ holds dear epitomizes our mission and is a shining example to us all of just what our members are capable of. Hardworking and humble, Gilbert Bailon's mentorship and support has paved the way for the success of countless young journalists. I've been so incredibly fortunate, as I know it's unusual, that for most of my professional career, I have had the privilege of working for Latino bosses, and the first one was Gilbert. Gilbert was the editor at the Dallas Morning News when he hired me from San Antonio. And it was an incredible feeling to see Gilbert, someone who looked like me, in the top job at the top paper in the state of Texas. I could see the path for achievement and advancement in my chosen career because Gilbert was laying the foundation and illuminating that path for me by simply being who he was. Gilbert started as a reporter and worked his way up. Smart and talented, he made it look easy. But now that I'm in upper management, I know it wasn't. I'm in awe of how he walked a fine line, staying true to his values, advocating for our gente without, well, completely alienating his conservative bosses. Gilbert has never forgotten where he came from or his responsibility to help others succeed inside America's newsrooms. He recognizes the importance of having diverse voices in all of our newsrooms. Thanks to Gilbert's mentorship, hiring, and encouragement, there are people in newsrooms from the West Coast to the East Coast providing those much needed diverse voices in their respective newsrooms and organizations. Gilbert is a powerful leader, a fixture of our NAHJ community, and is fully deserving of this year's Presidential Award. This video offers a glimpse of what we're talking about, Gilbert.
Journalists do work of substance. They do work that spurs reaction and positive changes. Our coverage in Ferguson began as an inherently local story of a fatal police shooting. The underpinnings, the social, economic issues, the police issues, the militarization of police, a lack of political representation, and these other issues that we'll continue to delve into. Be able to answer to yourself, this is why I do what I do.
Buenas noches, NHJ. This year marks my 40th year being in the newspaper business. And fortunately, I've had most of that time working with NHJ, its members, and its affiliates in the different cities I've lived in. It's been a great experience for us and a great springboard for my career. I've seen tremendous growth in NHJ in those times since I was president in the 90s. The mid-90s when we were in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, we had a binational, bicultural, bilingual event where we had students, speakers. We even had a charreada in Ciudad Juarez. So we've grown a lot since that time. NHJ is now more than 4,000 members. It's grown tremendously. I see the growth of the individuals as well as the impact in our media. But we also must acknowledge that while we've had great strides, there are many more strides we must take. And I'm particularly looking at what we must do to rise higher in the upper echelons of our business. We need more top editors. We need more news directors. We need more people who are going to be in boardrooms. We need more people who are college deans. Because when we get that access, that's where we can directly influence hiring, promotion, coverage decisions, and really make the impact that we want to make. So I encourage you all, while you are new to the business or you've been in there a long time, we need to look to continue to rise in the ranks of management. That's where true change will come for all coverage of all people of color, not just Latinos. And this is an important time for us to step forward with that. I also look back and I see how many people who I've worked with through the years have risen in those ranks or have just been great successes. We have new people who are creating new platforms, new outlets, new voices. We have many, many people in college, more people in college than we used to have, many of them Latinas, who are now making an influence in our business. We need to continue that. I look upon the things that we built when we were in the 90s. That was scholarships, advocacy, student projects, inclusion of Spanish language media, and that has all grown and that needs to continue to grow. But I'm particularly interested in us being in the places of decision making. For us to really make the changes we need more than numbers. Latinos are 60 million people in the country. We're the largest minority. However, we're still very underrepresented in the media. And to do that, we need to penetrate those corporate offices, those decision-making areas. And we also need to train ourselves. You need to step forward, take those chances, be resilient, look at the sacrifices, do some things that are uncomfortable to you that could lead to your career. Because ultimately, it's not about your career. There's a greater mission we have with NHJ and all the other minority associations, and that is to have more inclusive coverage to reflect our country that's becoming more diverse. I know we can do it. I'm encouraged by what I see, but we need to continue. We need to continue to be the people we have always been as advocates, but also to train ourselves. We can't wait for others to act. We have many, many allies, but we need to act ourselves. We're the ones who need to train, get educated, make those extra efforts, work the hardest. Tenemos las ganas, and we have the ability to do this. But I also encourage you not to think that we've succeeded completely, but we have great success. And for that, I say, mil gracias, NHJ. It's been a great honor to be with this group. I will continue to work with this group. I have many friends and colleagues. We're an important part of the industry and will continue to be. Adelante y mil gracias.
Congratulations, Gilbert, and to the work of all of our honorees this evening. Cuando las personas pueden verse a sí mismas, comienzan a comprender que somos más parecidos que diferentes. Aplaudimos las historias que cambian corazones y mentes y junto con nuestra asociación ampliamos esas historias y aumentamos nuestra visibilidad. Es hoy cuando tienen que verse y reconocerse los cambios que los periodistas han provocado en nuestras comunidades y sus necesidades de información. That's it from here at Telemundo Center in Miami, Florida. Thank you for joining us for this remarkable event. Good night.